Hello and welcome to this edition of Age of Truth TV. I'm Lucas Alexander in Copenhagen, Denmark. It's the 19th of July 2021, and our guest today is an American author and speaker and a former businessman, a coffee buyer at coffee farms in Asia. He is the creator of the Adapt 2030 platform and a video series on his Mini Ice Age Conversations podcast. He's now trying to warn the world about climate change, but instead of global warming, he believes that global cooling will become a major problem and that people have to prepare for a mini ice age because of a grand solar minimum. David Dubine. Good evening from Copenhagen, Denmark, and good midday to our very special guest, David Dubine, joining us from somewhere in the mountains near Knoxville, Tennessee, in the United States. We are thrilled to welcome you on the show. Thank you so much for being with us.
Appreciate you having me. There's so many connecting ideas with the world changing. I'm going to try to at least show my speciality in understanding cycles of time, cycles of civilization, and how the planets and the electromagnetism from the sun affect how much food we can grow on this planet. And it's a cycle as well. And the responses of governments across the planet happening today are a direct response of our grow season shrinking and the amount of food that we're not going to be able to grow from this point forward. Still having 8 billion mouths to feed. So the control net needs to come down. And as you said previously, it seems like we're being corralled. Well, we are.
Great. It will surely be a fascinating time we'll have with you today because you've become a little bit controversial for contradicting the official political narrative on climate change, global warming, and global sustainability. The narrative that we've been told through massive mainstream media repetition throughout the years, that the world is practically going under due to the overheating of the planet and the CO2 scare. But then you come along, David Dubine, and claim that climate change is real and that we have to become aware of this now in order to adapt to these enormous changes ahead of us. Only that it is not global warming we're talking about, but global cooling, a mini ice age that awaits us. The so-called grand solar minimum cycle, which you claim that we will soon all have to face. And you've created a platform that you call Adapt 2030, which easily can remind us of the infamous UN Agenda 21, UN Agenda 2030 plan, whose main goal is to control all resources and to promote coming restrictions and resource shortages due to CO2, climate change, global warming. There are many things to discuss, and you will also be presenting slides to the audience to go more in depth. But first of all, I'd like to ask you a few questions, and before I do that, please first of all introduce yourself to the audience, tell them a little bit about your background and history, and what led you to believe that the Earth is in fact cooling down.
Cooling by how much, and how much would it affect society? Now, before the introduction, I used to buy coffee in a country called Myanmar. Burma is what you know it now. This one was just opening up 2012-13. But talking to the coffee farmers up there, they were getting cold damage on the coffee plants. So what's happening with that? I was told global warming, I'm in one of the warmest nations on the planet, right at the equatorial band, and they're getting cold damage in the coffee plantations. But come to find out, they talked about their grandfathers and great-grandfathers having the same experiences back in the 1870s, 1880s, when they really started to bring coffee there as a commercial crop, when the English were in control of Burma, or Myanmar, as it's now known. Just set me on a simple question. Why is it cooling? Is it going to cool more? And how much coffee can we get if it continues to cool? Because there was a formula that you had to work with. The coffee farmers there were overplanting about 12 to maybe 14% of new plantings because they knew that the cold would kill off some. So it wasn't going to be 100% fill rate. Like when they would add new production area, they would plant out, let's say, an acre. Well, they would overplant knowing that the full acre wouldn't take, that there would be damage to the new plantings. And they were keeping them in the greenhouse longer as well. Well, not a greenhouse, but it's a fabric covered area to keep the climate more controlled. They were using, and they had to expand that second year of keeping those plants out of the ground for that second or the extra 6 months, second year, because they just had to get a little bit bigger to be able to withstand the cold going into the ground out in the fields. So that made me question, all right, well, I didn't really think about it as such as a game-changing thing at that time, but I started to look, what about Myanmar and Burma? Are there cycles there? What's happening? Was it warmer? Was it colder? And sure enough, I ran into John Casey's research, former NASA space shuttle investigator, lead investigator on the space shuttle disaster. So somebody with that level, when the space shuttle blows up in the sky and they put that person in the lead of the investigation as to what the mishap was with the space shuttle, that's a very high level person, until he started talking about the cycles, and then he lost his tenureship, job, career, because he started to speak out about these repeating cycles and said, hey, we're coming back into a cool cycle based on solar activity. And then I started to look back in the 1880s, and then I could map up the solar activity with what was happening, and it seemed a pretty good match. So that sent me on my quest looking, all right, forget the CO2 for now, we'll put it to the side. Why don't I just look at the solar activity and see how this works? And then the floodgates opened on high solar activity means the height of a civilization in terms of art, engineering, mathematics, creativity, and whatever else, trade, because so many other people have more calories in their bellies. They can think differently. But then when you see really incredible amounts of low solar activity, 1 or 2 solar cycles that don't have almost no sunspots, you're at the dark ages. If people can't eat, their brains aren't functioning correctly. Their cognitive abilities aren't kicked in, if you will. If you're malnourished, you're not thinking correctly. So then we have this ebb and flow of cycle tops, cycle bottoms. And what was the cause of that? Because back 3,600 years ago, 8,100 years ago, 4,100 years ago, we didn't have SUVs driving around or airplanes or factories. So what caused those massive temperature swings of up to 3 degrees Celsius, some 5,000, 6,000, 7,000 years ago? And then you got these massive drop-off in cooling, 8,100 years, 4,100 years. And that would be, right about now again. So if you start to overlap cycles on top of cycles, you have smaller cycles, the 11-year solar cycle, and then those can be combined into a set as well of since the beginning of the space age, or if you want to do, they call it a centennial, which means 100 years. And then those on top of Schwab cycles and Bray cycles and grand solar minimum cycles. And it's just like the back of a Swiss watch. You have small handles, you have larger handles.
I just want to jump in here, David, because you said you were working as a kind of a businessman in Myanmar, or however you say that, in Burma, and you were buying coffee as a businessman at these coffee plants.
Not coffee plant, but at coffee farms themselves.
Okay.
Directly from the buyers. Yeah, we would go do some of those amazing travel. Myanmar was just opening up, and here we are, because we used to trade inter-Asia. We just exported from Myanmar inter-Asia. So to go down there and be able to explore some of these areas that hadn't been open in 4 decades, and then we popped in and like, hey, we want to see your coffee farms. some of the most exquisite, untouched areas on the planet that we were able to visit by doing this. I was so blessed and so grateful to see it.
And you were buying that for an American firm that you were representing, or what?
Out of Taiwan, in Taipei.
An American firm in Taiwan.
You could call it that, but it was mainly foreigners who had formed that company there.
Okay, so that was your career for years, but what led you to suddenly change your entire path, and now you're living as a kind of, well, I don't know if you can call it a recluse or something in a Cherokee territory in eastern Tennessee, in this fascinating place that you have here that you can talk about as well. But I mean, what changed your entire perspective on life? And why did you decide to talk about these things and talk about global cooling? I mean, in a way, you're still promoting a climate change agenda, right?
I am, but I'm not promoting the right causation for the climate change. And Lucas, you hit it there on the head. I mean, the reason that Vice News wrote that hit piece on me was because I'm very focused on solar cycles causing change versus CO2 causing change.
But then you're still promoting a climate change agenda in a way. Is that not, I mean, isn't that still part of the whole fear porn scare game that we've been programmed to believe all through our lives, basically, that we must be really careful with the climate because the earth is going under? And basically in the last 10 years, the propaganda has been extraordinary, and people are really fearing what is going to happen, and with the whole CO2 thing, which you said is not true. And a lot of people we've had on the show, of course, they come out here and say that we don't have climate change. It's a hoax. It's part of a UN Agenda 21, UN Agenda 2030 plan. And this was arranged through the Club of Rome way back in the early 1970s, and then there was the Rio Summit in 1992, and then this whole UN agenda plan was rolled out, and we are certainly seeing it right now with the whole Corona thing. But I mean, isn't that still kind of playing that same game if you are now promoting climate change and you say that we have to be very, very careful, but it's just global cooling instead of global warming? What are your thoughts?
We don't have to be careful about anything except learning where to shift our crops as areas in the planet aren't able to grow them any further or any longer. It's not about being careful about, oh, I need a low flow toilet, or I need a CFL light bulb or an LED light bulb, or I can't drive my car because it's going to put this gas in the air. That's where the control agenda comes in. The control agenda is all about your consumption patterns, your way of life, where you can live, how you can eat. On that whole Agenda 2030, total control over every movement of your life based on a fictitious cause for the changing climate. Now, swing it over into these grand solar minimum cycles. There's really nothing you can do. It's a reset for society every single time anyway. The best thing we could have done is started to talk about this and have people become more self-sufficient, to have them learn to grow their own foods, learn how to store their own foods, get the communities organized to be able to prepare for these in ways where communities themselves and households could produce so they wouldn't have to rely on the supply chains. That's quite a bit different mechanism than controlling every single aspect with the Kobe Pass and this, that, and the other based on how much CO2, quote unquote, is going off. We're going to turn off your air conditioning. You know, you saw in Texas, they automatically with the smart meters turned people's air conditioning to a higher level because they were using too much electricity. That's completely the opposite of where we're going. On the edge of this grand solar minimum, everybody's going to need to be incredibly more self-sufficient and not rely on supply chains, which is the opposite of the control mechanism. The more freedom you would have being off of supply chains, off of government control, the more freedom it offers you, especially in taxation, because you wouldn't need to buy a lot of things. You could trade more. And this is where we should have gone for the last 20 years discussing this. But the greatest thing that I keep talking about is where we grow food currently on the major grain crops, corn, wheat, soy, That's generally at 45 degrees north latitude and above in the northern hemisphere. So that would include parts of northern Europe, the Canadian border with the United States, and maybe a few of the states down in the US, most of Canada, almost all of North China. And then if we go into the southern hemisphere, we find that same 45-degree north latitude, and you'll find Australia, South Africa, parts of South America. Now, these areas are going to already have, and we're not going to say start, they already have started to reduce greatly the amount of grain output. So as we move forward to the next couple of years, we've got a couple choices.
But is that not part of the UN Agenda Plan already? They have already planned the food shortages and resource shortages that we have also been exposing on this show a lot, having researchers into this talking about that this is a plan also and now the World Economic Forum with the Great Reset, Klaus Schwab and all of that we can expect maybe next year already and in the coming years due to this pandemic situation.
See, that's the problem. The control mechanism is the lack of knowledge about this entire event that's a natural event on a recurring cycle that's mappable. Why haven't we had the discussions of which crops are going to grow better when we need to move our grow zone 600 miles south? Why haven't we had worldwide discussions on which crops can be substituted from spelt to millet to amaranth to sorghum and hemp? Why haven't we talked about this? Why are we still producing the same exact crops which we know are failing now, not going to, are failing where they grow now because they're in the wrong climate? Rainfall patterns are shifting. Jet streams are moving, cloud cells are bunching up on each other, and this would be expected when the electromagnetism of the sun steps down. And the only reason people don't know this, or the aha moment of you're crazy versus, oh yeah, I know that, is the education. I mean, it's built into the global warming agenda that you do not understand basic principles of the solar system. You don't understand. The average school system does not teach the electromagnetic connection of the sun to the earth and how they need to stay equal. So if the sun is charging the earth for 400 years to the same equilibrium state, if it steps down, the earth's overcharged. It's going to behave differently as it loses to step down and equalize its charge. They don't teach that, and I'm sure in Europe it's the same. In the EU, that is not basic taught curriculum in schools, the basic workings of how the solar system works.
But they're actually trying. I mean, the top elitists behind the orchestration of the New World Order, they have been trying to prevent the regular population from growing their own foods for a long time. Actually, in many places, it's not even allowed.
Or to catch and harvest your own rainwater in Oregon, a state in the United States. It's illegal to harvest the rainwater off your roof into barrels on the side of your house.
Madness.
Because they say, oh, that's going to go in and we can sell the water rights if it hit the stream. A cattle rancher somewhere could, oh, wait, we're trying to outlaw cattle ranching because it puts methane in the atmosphere. Okay, wait. So the whole premise of you're stealing the water off your roof because a cattle rancher downstream could buy it, but now you're outlawing cattle ranching. So wait, where's the whole loop in this? I just don't get it. The control mechanism of your own natural resources is nefarious, to say the least. And the control grid is snapping down now.
In order to impose total control on the population, right?
For what purpose? And again, you mentioned Klaus Schwab and the Great Reset. I find it so incredibly interesting that this grand solar minimum was forecast to intensify. 2021 was the first year that were predicted crop losses to affect the global economy. And magically, we have cryptocurrency coming in as a new monetary system when the old fiat system won't work because the output of a nation, the fiat is a representation of that. And if there's no confidence in the money system at the base, then that's not going to work any longer. The trust between national banks, sovereign nations, whatever it is on the fiat trade side, not going to happen. So, oh, magically, cryptocurrency is here. Now, don't get me wrong. I am a huge fan of crypto and blockchain, and I believe it's a way to free us. But again, you come back into central bank digital currencies and central issuance again, and this is a whole can of worms. Central banks want to stay in power. And then the Great Reset. Oh, 400 years of the way our lives were, and now we just need to change it last year. Just suddenly need to change it. Well, no, it's about controlling how much food, access to food you're going to have. and you're telling me that they're limiting population migration, which is one of the main things in a grand solar minimum. Every time these events happen, people move to different areas that had a better chance for economy, food production, resources, ways of life, if you will. Population migration, economic reset, and governmental overthrow. Those are the three things that happen every grand solar minimum. And Klaus Schwab and his merry band of economic marauders come over here and start saying that we need to reset everything. There's new money, there's new government, there's new everything. At the same time, this grand solar minimum is starting to affect food and affect the economy and affect government because people are on the streets asking for change. And they're overlapping. And you're telling me that's a coincidence. I just don't buy it. I think that the elite knew this cycle. They're riding on top of the natural cycle. And they're trying to use this as a control mechanism to stay in power as we transition through the other side to the new world. That new world order, I believe, is after this event here on the other side.
So would you suggest that the whole orchestration of this world crisis that we're facing at the moment with the so-called plandemic is orchestrated because they know of the grand solar minimum cycle coming up? Or is this just what they do occasionally, the elitists, every century or every, it's been 86 or 87 years since the Second World War, and a lot of people claim that this is the Third World War that we're in at the moment, just with an invisible enemy that we can't see, and we have to fear something that we can't see, actually, the whole situation with the virus and everything. But I mean, and then the Great Reset. A lot of people say that they do these great resets, and they've done that also throughout history, way back to the ancient civilizations, maybe to Atlantis and Lemuria, and lots of stuff being covered up and hidden. And then they do another reset, and then new civilizations can spring up after that. What are your thoughts on this? Is this by design, all of it, because of natural Earth changes, or because of this control plan, because they can no longer keep people under control because there's been a mass awakening, especially in the last 10 years?
All of the above, overlapping and intermingling with each other. So if we start at the farthest reaches out, the full-blown ice age is about 100,000 years. But what happened to those other 10,000 years of warmth prior to the ice age starting 112,000 years ago? What about, you mentioned Lemuria, that's the reason I wanted to start going that far back. I mean, what happened to the other interglacial where the people at that time, physiologically exactly the same, anatomically exactly the same, mind size exactly the same, perception capabilities, everything exactly the same. So you can't tell me they sat there, the people 118,000 years ago in the last interglacial, sat there for 10,000 years and did nothing. Where are remnants of those civilizations? If you want to talk about Lemuria, take it a step further back into the actual last interglacial where it was warm just like it is today for 10,000 years. Where is any record of that? None. None. Now, what if you knew these cycles? And to get back to answer the question in a long way, what if you knew the cycles? And you knew that nothing would survive through this cycle in terms of the way that, like you say, had been set up for the current civilization. Like the civilization set up would have an expiration date based on electromagnetic field of the Earth, the sun, the resonance in that, and then the top-down control mechanism could exist within that frequency that could be put on top of humanity, existing in a single frequency band. Now, right now, these last 10 years, what's changing? The electromagnetic field of the sun is changing, which has the effect on our crust, on our Earth, on our magnetosphere, on our atmosphere, but we're electromagnetic as well. The awakening is because the sun is doing something different in this old power structure that existed during that one frequency band that the sun had held for how many, either hundreds of years or thousands of years, has just changed. So the perception of what is reality is changing for everybody on the planet at the same time, because our perception is literally changing as the frequency field's changing. The frequency field's coming from the sun first, the Birkeland current running from there out somewhere in the spiral arm of the galaxy, Don't know about that, how far and which planets it's or other stars and solar systems it's hit first. But where we sit now, our sun's being affected. That resonant frequency field's changing here on Earth. So the top-down pyramidal structure that has put us in place for how many years of central bank control, wars, warlords, president, whatever, that's not going to hold state anymore. Literally, it won't be able to hold frequency in a higher vibration field. That was some real dark energy over these last few centuries that has held humanity down. They understand that. The elite understand this. The frequency field's changing, so their old bondage and chains of heavy dark energy is not going to hold, because this new energy coming in, we're coming into a more of a lighter frequency. So each day people are becoming more aware, like that super heavy thing doesn't really make sense anymore. So the elite are going to have to come up with a new system to still control humanity, hence the Great Reset. I still can't believe that these are just randomly related like that. And I hope that answered your question.
Well, random, I doubt it. But then now we also hear about they want to dim the sun. They talk about that. Bill Gates talks about that. And we already know about HAARP technology. So don't you think they're actually using those HAARP technologies, or even linking to the, well, to the Neuralink satellite system, the Elon Musk system, and whatever they have with electromagnetic frequencies and phased arrays, which they also use. What are your thoughts on that, also in terms of weather modification?
Now, for a lot of people who've been following this heat dome, this record heat event in British Columbia and the western part of the United States, Oregon, Washington, if you hadn't seen 2 weeks before that, the FAA, which is the Aviation Administration in the United States, put a warning out to aircraft, do not transit in this area, because they were turning HAARP on again. And again, is it coincidental that there was an issuance of the FAA as a no-fly zone where HAARP was being used? And then suddenly 2 weeks later, we get the hottest temperatures ever recorded, locked in place. And, you know, it's been locked there, and another heat event is happening now, and it's locked in place. So it's like, I'm going to say it's almost artificial the way it's locked in place, this high pressure dome causing these heat events over. And guess what? You still can't fly over that area. It's still a no-fly zone due to HAARP being used. Now, putting those two together, you're like, okay, the weather modification's a real thing. They talked about owning the skies. The military has for such a long time. But this geoengineering is another wild animal to talk about for a second here. Like, the perception of geoengineering is, you know, they put these nanoparticulate metals up in the atmosphere, and it's there to block the sunlight. Bill Gates. What's not widely talked about is cosmic radiation management for these same nanoparticulates. So cosmic rays increase during these same grand solar minimums. The sun's activity steps down, and our magnetic shielding gets weaker. It allows more of these energetic particles to come into our atmosphere. And actually they zip through the earth, but on their way down, they hit and, you know, spackle off of a lot of other things as they pinball their way down through the atmosphere. And each thing that they collide with starts the base charge where other things can then coalesce, and it creates a cloud droplet. Well, this nanoparticulate metal, when these same particles come in and they hit those nanometals, they lose their charge. It's found, especially during these last 3 years of research, that cosmic ray increases equate to a 7x increase in rainfall on the planet. Now, it's not going to be like that Noah's Ark for, 100 years, but during these 2 years of really intense low solar activity, you're going to get massive increases in rainfall. So is the geoengineering another cover story application for cosmic radiation management to stop massive biblical flood events by putting nanoparticulate metals to stop the base charge of these incoming cosmic rays? So which one's easier to sell to the public? The geoengineering, you got to talk to the Air Force, you got to stop it, we got to stop the planes because they're blocking the sun. Or we need to continue to do this cosmic radiation project, because if we do stop, the biblical rainfall at 7x increase is going to flood almost every city across the planet. Which one's going to be easier to sell to the public? And I don't know which one's more, they're both being used, but I don't know which one's being used at the most and for the real usage of the program, but I know both applications are in play. And Bill Gates talking about dimming the sun.
Then maybe you really would get global cooling, right? If he would dim the sun, and then we really would see it. Otherwise, they can just like turn on the heater if they wanted to warm up the planet, so to speak, with this HAARP technology. And you say that they just turned it on again, and they also talk about having turned CERN on again. I mean, I'm talking about the Large Hadron Collider underneath CERN in Switzerland. And there's also talk about them turning it on here in 2021. So everything links to this number 21, it seems. And so, I mean, what we want here is, of course, to get to as close to the truth as we can. So if you would explain to the audience a little bit about what is grand solar minimum, and before you do, I just want to ask you symbolically, could these cosmic rays from the sun that you're talking about, could they symbolically be linked to the wreath around the sun that is actually called corona?
Absolutely, because, well, for everybody listening out there, I encourage you to do your own research, and I don't want you to listen to me in this for anything I say today. I don't want you to believe anything I say. You need to do your own research. If you go start down the rabbit hole of doing your own research, you're going to understand it far better than I can explain it to you, because you're going to find your own bits and pieces in the way you explain it to others. So I encourage you to do your own research. Please don't listen to me. I'm here to present information. Now, after that, it's your job to go out and prove me correct or incorrect. And I think you're going to find that a lot of this information is true. So I wish you would try to disprove it, because that's the best way to prove it.
But now we want your take on it.
The changes in the planets that are happening right now are going to be and are visible from our planet. So when you talk about signs in the skies and changes in colors, fields, sizes, vibrations, and the Pluto, if we start out at the furthest planet, Pluto, back in May of 2020, Pluto's atmosphere collapsed. And I thought, well, that's pretty interesting. And then 6 months later, in December of 2020, Neptune's atmosphere reversed. And then if we come just a few months back, Uranus had these incredible X-ray flares that were visible, that were jumping the rings out. But at the same time this occurred, the aurora on Jupiter were a 10x increase, where you could actually, if you were looking at it from Earth, Jupiter would appear a little more of a blue tinge, and that wasn't like an atmospheric anomaly or something. Actually, it was more blue because the auroras were actually coming down off the sides from the poles, coming down into the upper latitudes, where the top and the bottom of Jupiter were glowing blue. And you know, Saturn, the cult of Saturn, Saturn's auroras are going crazy also with the blue tinge. But just 2 weeks ago, Mars had this most amazing anomaly where Mars doesn't really have a magnetic field on it, but the aurora started glowing out of the mineral composition in the veins in the crust, where they were getting auroras coming literally out of the crust, connecting with the minimal magnetic sheath that's created by the effect from the sun when it buffets that planet. So this really has a lot of connection back to the ancient, when they said they could see these ley lines glowing, and a lot of these ancient temples, etc., were put on top of these ley lines. The exact same thing just happened on Mars, and now these control mechanisms suddenly ramped up in these last 3 weeks. The sun is going to change also. You're going to see it get larger and change color, not to the point where it's going to turn completely blue and you'll be like, wow, blue sun. But it is. The weaker it goes, the larger that corona puffs out on it. So if it looks like the sun is a little bit larger, fuzzier, etc., that you're going to expect that. And as that happens, our atmosphere is also in turn going to compensate and rebalance itself, meaning the cloud cells, the jet streams, the rainfall patterns, and the droughts are going to go into different places. So let me make a bold call here. You're going to start hearing this new word called equatorial vortex in the news from now on. They have to explain why the jet streams are moving off the equator way up to the poles, and from the poles, you know, the polar vortex, where the poles and it dips really far south. Well, they have to explain why it's going to start moving both directions now. Because the sun has stepped down further, and we're going to get more effects where the jet streams are going to lose their complete flow, and they're just going to wander anywhere, but they're going to need an explanation for this called the equatorial vortex, and look for changes in the sun. Everything's going to change in the entire solar system. We're going to see signs in the skies. Electrical phenomena that look like elves and different petroglyphs coming off canyon walls are going to be visible in our skies in less than 3 years. Now, how do you explain that to a populace? You can't. You got to distract them or control them. Sorry, I rambled on that a little bit, Lucas.
No, it's very interesting. But I mean, they also talk about Project Bluebeam projecting a fake alien invasion as the last control, well, initiative or whatever maneuver that they talk about doing to impose the new world order on the population. That's what the NASA scientist Wernher von Braun, who was a former Nazi, told Carol Rosin, who was a UFO researcher years ago when they were working together in 1976 on his deathbed. What are your thoughts on this? This is also holographic in structure and something they have the technology that we're not told anything about. Don't you think that some of those phenomena that you talk about could actually also be like Project Bluebeam, or do you think it's real?
Von Braun, rocket scientist, rebranded as Dr. Braun Electrogravitics 1960. And if you know anything about electrogravitics, it's 2 disks that spin in different directions. Now, they discharge electricity, but they also become weightless. So a lot of these craft that you alluded to, yeah, they could absolutely, I believe most of them are our own anti-gravity technology that's not available to the public because it gives you free electricity. There's no meter on it. You can power a city, you can power a home, a neighborhood. And imagine if our transportation was weightless. Imagine a train that's a mile long weighing nothing. How much fuel would we actually burn on this planet? We would. The control grid would be lost by free power on this planet. So if you talk about chimeras, I had a really interesting conversation with Ransom Godwin, who runs 420 TV Freedomist Films. He was talking about chimeras and gene splicing technology, that the level right now where we sit technologically for gene splicing and creating an animal-human hybrid chimera is so advanced that he says, I don't care if a UFO landed in my front yard and an alien-looking thing popped out of it. The level of technology we have right now with anti-gravitics and chimera gene splicing human-animal hybrid, they could create something that looked 30% animal and 70% human.
So it could be man-made. Deep state military.
Could be man-made. He's like, I wouldn't even believe it if I saw it because I know that they could create these types of chimeras. You know, they gave us a perception of what an alien or you know, I believe in extraterrestrial life. I absolutely do. I think it's the base of all construct of consciousness across this universe is life. So don't get me wrong. There's definitely more life out there than you can shake 1,600 trillion sticks at. But for it to land here and try to then enslave humanity further, no, that's a human trick.
Well, they've probably done that already, huh?
Yeah.
Controlling the governments of the world. That's what we hear about.
Statism when you were born is the first trick. You're born into a nation. No, that's the first trick they put on top of you. Statism. That's the first lead into the full control mechanism. If there were no nation states, then almost everything that happens today, there'd be no wars, there'd be no currencies, there would be no control grid, right?
Orchestrated slavery, huh?
That's a way to put it. But what are they enslaving you for? Your labor, your time, and...
mind control.
Yeah, and vibration frequency that you're putting out as a human being. So, you know, they always talk about these interdimensional realms here of things feeding off of frequency. So why is it the sun's frequency is changing? The elite need to change their control mechanism because it can't exist in the frequency anymore. So the whatever resonant we're putting out is going to change too. So there's if you can control, if you understand the frequency field, it makes a lot more sense to see why things are changing so much and why so much more control needs to come down. Because think about it, the slaves on the plantation are awakening everywhere across the entire planet. And I'm not talking any race of people. I'm saying humanity being enslaved by control mechanism. If the entire planet wakes up at the same time, there's 8 billion of us and what? Probably less than 10 million elite. then what? So what do you have to do to control and remain in power if you're outnumbered 8,000 to 1?
But don't we see very clearly right now that even though a lot of people have been waking up massively in the last 5 and 10 years, and also for the last 16 years that I've been in this game and studying all of these things, I mean, there's been an explosion of people waking up, but still we're also seeing more and more people being jumping back into the control grid, and we see how easily people will comply and believe in anything. We've seen that in the last year and a half, and now with all of the medicine that people are taking, that's the word we use for it. So I mean, and there are millions billions of people have already taken that. I mean, isn't that a way of saying hello and thank you very much to get the mark of the beast?
It is. And you have to wonder, how good has this mind programming been over the last however long anybody's been alive, from 1 year to 70 years? I mean, now they want you to get a passport to be able to go to work after you get medicine. If you don't get the medicine, you're not even going to be able to go into a grocery store in places. Now, see, it all comes back down to the food, does it not? The Grand Solar Minimum is going to limit food production, but now, even if you're going to want to access food, you're going to have to get some medicine and get a special paper that says you can go access food. It's coming back to the same loop again. And I'm just, you're very awake, and others are also so awake. So why is it a small percentage of the population has been able to see past the programming and stay awake, yet an enormous amount of the population drops back into, is it the comfort zone? Is it they have to do what they need to do to keep their families? Because, having a family is way different than being single, or, if you have kids, you're going to behave differently than if you don't. Is it for protection? I don't know. I really don't.
But why is this, David? What are your thoughts, David, on this? I mean, why do people comply like this? Why is it not totally obvious what's going on? I mean, you just said it. You need a passport now to soon buy your groceries.
And people are going to continue to jump through that hoop because, I think there's a couple different variants going on here. I should say facets of a diamond, for a better word. The social pressure. They have friends, neighborhood people, and as soon as you step out, and I've had this personal experience, you got a group of friends, a group of people around you, neighbors, whatever, and as soon as you step out of the conceived norm of that thought in that group, you're simply either beaten back into place or ostracized. You got two choices. Now, the world's so up and down right now that people are almost in this panic fear mode to stay and can grasp anything that is considered normal or stable these days. And maybe they're out of fear grasping at anything and saying anything and pretending. And I'm really wondering the number of people pretending it, faking it. So the family members, the political members, the neighborhood around you, the school board, those people all around in that circle that could have your children taken away would be faking it, even though deep down inside they don't believe it. They're just going along with it because they have to keep stability, keep their families.
Because people are not brave enough to stand up for the truth, or what? I mean, the most strategically clever thing to do is to get people to go against each other. And snitching and this fear propaganda. It's basically to impose the Hegelian dialectic on the population between neighbors, divide and conquer, splitting.
That's who's going to get the food, the best informant. You're going to get meat this week if you inform on your neighbors. They're going to have to continue to eat bugs or not have enough food. They're going to eat plain rice. You're going to get filet mignon if you snitch on your neighbor. And don't even delude yourself if you don't think it's going to go this direction. The amount of food that's going to be available for the general world populace is going to shrink year after year from now.
But that's done by design, though. That's part of the agenda. That's not because of a mini ice age that you talk about. That's what they want. This is the whole Soylent Green idea, isn't it?
Well, the grand solar minimum is a known cycle. So I'm going to say 100% the elite are riding on top of a natural cycle, taking advantage of the cyclic nature of workings in our solar system and universe to then continue their agendas, put more control down. And for me, I go into it, I say, all right, let's say you did reduce the world population down to 500 million. And then they have the utopian dream and the technocratic society, and everything's monitored, tracked, and traced, and everybody's on a social credit score, and you're just like controlled to the nth degree where you can't even step a half a foot out your door without being monitored, and everything's known about you, and too, your vital signs, your blood, your stress level, everything's known about you. And then what? And then what? Really, and then what? Because it only can go to that point, and then what? And that's what baffles me, is when we get to the end, then what?
Can they control our souls ultimately, do you think? If we have a soul at the point of, death, when our souls leave the body, will this whole, the medicine and everything we talk about eventually be an AI kind of injection, so that even on a soul level you will be linked to a super brain computer and be encapsulated there and not be able to go to source or go wherever you want to go? I mean, what are your thoughts on this? This is a large topic, but we've talked about it before on the show.
If you want to limit your belief system that the creator is not that powerful, and the consciousness vibration that created this entire third dimension of everything we know and on this planet, and how things far work, and we can't even see the edge of the known universe, the being that created that against a little tiny AI on our planet, you got to think maybe it's a mind control thing, where maybe the mind does follow and the mind creates the reality. Because, if we're talking about a multiverse, like, how do we get stuck in this thin band, and how do we get out of here? I remember you talking to David about that. Like, how do we get out of this thin band of multiverse? Because I don't want to be here. I want to be living in fields of flowers, cruising in bounty. And I think the way that, groups of us out here are thinking, this chaos is just going to completely sweep by. Nobody's going to visit us out here. It's going to completely bypass us. This entire juncture is going to go. We're going to live out here in abundance and love, and everything else will pass us by, and we will be out here in the new world. And, you've got to think about, does mind create reality, or are they trying to get you in to believe that at that moment of death, you're going to be trapped in that computer, versus thinking about, light source can grab me back because it's so much more infinitely powerful than anything we could ever create. And I don't care how advanced the technology is, because you mentioned, it seems like even in the ancient cultures that this reset, this rodeo, for better term for cowboys out there, has gone on again and again and again. Well, if that's the truth, then that means a more ancient civilization has survived every single reset and is still in control. So how many millions of years has that gone on? And I don't care how many millions of years you are into the future with tech, light source is going to be more powerful than that. Because magic is only technology you don't understand.
But why does Creator allow this to happen? This is an Earth that is captured by fear and angst, anxiety, and distress that these archon beings can feed off, huh?
Or create the food trough. And again, the stimulus in results in the output. So if you're gonna, what kind of food do you want to have this evening? Well, these entities that thrive off of really heavy non-light energies, fear, hate, loathing, depression, these kind of things, that's their food. And for that are them. So what's the stimulus? And yeah, you're right. Like, how did they get into power? The only thing I can think is, like myself, I'm really not going into politics. That's not my thing. I just don't resonate with climbing over a bunch of people for a position. So it seems that the leaders of the world have all been, kind of from that 2 or 3% of sociopath and psychopath, been built into this top level. So once you put everybody at that top level that is a sociopath, that is a psychopath, and let them run the hen house, then what? So how do we reverse that back to where people who have common sense still exist in the light, have free thought, are awake, can get into those positions, but almost everybody that doesn't want to be there, because that world of clawing and backstabbing and lies that you need to throw out every day and live in, that's not my waking existence. I want nothing to do with that. I need to resonate on a light level. So how do you get that? To bring the awareness out too of the changes we're facing and how we can come past some of these changes. But at the same time, how do you take those dark energies out of power and bring back our world, retain our world, take it back, and our countries as well?
Was that done by design also by creator, or do you think that the world, the earthly realm has been hijacked? Some people also talk about Saturn being the controller, the beam, the rings of Saturn, of beaming a frequency, putting Earth under frequency control, like a quarantine within this matrix.
I saw this movie, and maybe a few others have seen this, called Jupiter Ascending. And it reminded me of what you just said there. Earth is a farm. Resources, etc., consolidated and then taken off planet back to Jupiter, which was the main area with exactly the same thing. Millions and millions of years ahead in technology because they were never reset. But down here on the planet, everything kept getting reset, and it was the whole story of the control grid, the headquarters, the home base, for a better term, was located on Jupiter. And then every of these planets was being farmed, but they were specifically focusing in on the Earth here. And you would think at some point consciousness might sweep through and reset as well. Because you look out at the star field, and right now, currently, there's an enormous amount of stars that are going dim and then they're reigniting again. So what means is there's a frequency or an energy wave off these Birkeland currents that are coming through, causing these novas. The star dims for a while, and then the plasma sheath on the outside, heliocurrent sheath, reignites, and then it glows again. So as it's coming through, this frequency wave is snapping these stars to blow off, and then they come back in on their glow mode again. But during that time, that's a huge, huge energy burst coming through. So whatever was there had to be reset at that point. Anything that you would have technology-wise would be, as we understand it, we're talking not orders of magnitude above, not double, triple, not even 10,000. We're talking about 100 million X above in energy frequency, but not the same type of electrical frequency you understand as juice going down a wire to your home. It's just cosmic ray energies. So would that have an effect to reset it as well? There has to be an escape mechanism here. I mean, we talk about every grand religion through the world, and mystic tales and Native American Indian traditions and everything. There's just a reset that comes through to actually kick these archons back to their base where they can't that snaps them out of their control for at least some time before the human mind allows them to come back in through our compliance, I should say. It's a deep subject, super deep, but it does roll right into how do you control 8 billion people when there's not enough food? You're going to have a really nefarious group of people try to do that, because I would share it or get people on the ball to try to get ready to grow more on their own and get off the supply grid.
So did you actually explain to people enough what the grand solar minimum is exactly, and that cycle, in order for people to really grasp it and understand it? You talk about a coming mini ice age, and right now we're all very hot, even up here in Scandinavia, which are usually quite cold countries, but it's like really, really warm at the moment, hot here in the summer. But I mean, but there's a natural cycle. A lot of people we've had on the show say that there's natural climate changes happening, earth changes happening all the time, but it's not very drastic. But you claim that it's quite drastic, the coming mini ice age. How drastic is it going to be?
Average global temperature drop of about 1.75 C. Some areas would be less affected at probably almost 1 degree Celsius. Other areas are going to be greatly affected of up to 5 degrees Celsius. Depends on the latitude. This grand solar minimum is a 400-year cycle in solar activity, where as we descend through this solar cycle now, which won't be nearly as energetic as projected. The next two solar cycles, solar cycle 26 and 27, the tapering off of this one, which will be far shorter and less energetic than said, is going to take us in and already has begun. These are just the beginning effects of this 400-year cycle.
So it's going to be cold for 400 years?
No, the cycle's 400 years that we have two solar cycles of almost no sunspots, the lead into it, and then the trajectory out of it. During this time, everywhere that you grow food now is not going to be as stable to understand the planting and the harvesting periods because the seasons to grow are going to be shrunk. Total in and out, 15-ish years of the total, and then it's going to be stable for 400 more years, but the cycle will repeat and return. So the actual effect of the cycle and the intensity and the destruction of the areas where we grow food currently is about a full 15-year period, maybe a little longer, 15 to 18 years. Remember, it's transiting in and transiting out. But do the historical studies. Go back every 400 years and look at the changes in the way people were ruled, the way the economy shifted, the technological jumps at that point to reinstitute, like you said, a new society. Here we are again. So food's the most important thing. So how would you, I might ask you the same question then, Lucas, like if you were a global leader and you knew there would only be enough food to feed 7 billion people, not 8 billion, or 6 billion versus 7 billion, how would you control that?
Well, since we suspect that they already control, well, everything in the whole narrative, and they're creating these food shortages and meat shortages, which they talk about, while they are also doing propaganda for veganism, and which is also linked to a climate agenda, I suppose. Whether you like it or not, or whether it works for you or not to eat that way, it's still a part of the agenda, I suppose. And I guess, you know, being all of these world leaders that work together and take orders from the same top elitists, then they already know what is going on and they want depopulation anyway. So I don't know how to answer that question. That would only be something we could talk about if a world leader was speaking the truth and wanted the best for their population. Right. I mean, I know I didn't answer your question, but I mean, we do suspect that everything is orchestrated and staged in a way, huh?
Yeah, those types of world leaders that you just referenced are always taken out of power, either assassinated or overthrown. What was it, the article I was reading, that 3 leaders of nations who didn't want the medicine in their country have all magically ended up dead.
In Africa, exactly.
Yeah. So, I mean, again, the statistical possibility of some of these events are nil. So, Lucas, you mentioned CERN firing up the Hadron Collider again in 2021. So for me, I am not really an expert on that. I know there's a lot of, you know, mystery around it and unexplained events when this happens. But HAARP coming up, the sun stepping down in frequency, and then firing up this Hadron Collider. What can you give me a glimpse into what you think that might mean?
That everything is orchestrated, perhaps even also what you're talking about with the grand solar minimum, but perhaps not. And this is where it's really interesting. What is natural? And are we also living in a very sophisticated simulation, a computer simulation? Is this holographic in structure? It's a sophisticated hologram, of course. Are we in a computer game anyway? Is any of it even real?
And do we all have our own multiverse that's our own creation? But then I look at that and say, well, I didn't make all these events happen out here to affect me sitting where I sit. But I've had a couple interesting discussions with people about the multiverse. And the reason it's a multiverse is 8 billion people on the planet. Each one gets their own universe, if you will, a slice of that to exist within, but then they overlap in on each other. But your one is yours for you that you created. And it gets so deep into this. I don't know, it is a mystery of the universe.
It really is, isn't it?
I know, you know, it's hard to know. in this physical body that's limited in the perception of what we can see, what we can hear. But if you notice, people's sixth sense is really kicked on. That's another indication that, you know, some other fields in play where there's a little sliver that's starting to become more visible in just the average person's waking consciousness state. Perhaps they want to call it sixth sense right now, but perhaps it's just an expanded version of what we can see, hear, taste, touch. But as we move forward, that what we consider sixth sense will become greatly enhanced to the point where the news will make no sense any longer. The elitist playbook can be seen through clearly like a, you know, like a glass wall. You can see right through it. And I think that's what has a lot of them running scared. But knowing that we're back in a cycle again of control, as you talked about, I question sometimes, really, you know, you might think you see this in wide picture, but maybe that was the whole control mechanism, was to allow you to see and perceive what you think is the full wide picture. But again, it's just the micro sliver that was put in place as the breadcrumb for you to find. No matter how far out on the edge of it is, you come to the edge of the breadcrumb.
So this could also be an orchestration in order for people to be forced to wake up, maybe.
To whose final benefit would that be if everybody awakens?
Some people do talk about that there are forces working behind the scenes for the greater good. And that's, of course, something that a lot of people, especially in the truth community and in spiritual communities, that they hope for. And we could certainly use it now, couldn't we? So, I mean, but a lot of people also they've been forced to think things through in the last year and a half, to think about what's important to them, what's important in their lives and their families, and who they need to be close to or not. I mean, even those who believe in the whole game, they have also been forced to do something that they've never done before and think in different ways. You know, to be a robot on this planet, have a life like that, working 9 to 5 and all of that every day. And it's been different. It's been a different reality for everyone.
And I think with these changes also happening frequency-wise, your thoughts are manifesting faster. And I know a lot of people, including myself, have seen this. Things you're thinking about, manifesting on, focusing on, are coming to fruition faster than they would have in the past. You can also use this to your advantage if you're not stuck in the fear. And fear takes so many different facets. Fear of people liking you, fear of the police, fear of not being able to eat, fear of losing your job. There's so many fears that are out there. But if you can swing past that and come over into using your mind to allow things to happen with and around you on a positive way that will guide you through and keep you safe during these times, is something not a lot of people are talking about as well. They are in certain communities of people, but it's just generally the wider scope of things, using your mind at this time, because our abilities are increasing in so many different ways, shapes, and fashions, to be able to use that projection of your thought out there. And that's what I'm always manifesting on, is the abundance and the thankfulness and the peace and the safety that we're experiencing out here. To take that as a daily moving through these changes, because everywhere you look, this media is fear, fear, fear. Everything's fear. And I do believe also another strange point with Hollywood, why is it that all these superhero movies have come out in the last couple of years? Is it that there's something that is happening with the human physiological or mental capabilities to allow us to have quote unquote superhuman powers as we move through these changes? I mean, I'll give you some of these slides here, but the ultimate point at which we get locked in the second electromagnetic field in the solar system is October of 2024. So the heaviest, most powerful effect of this beginning of the cycle occurring in these next 3 years culminates on that date.
Wow, we certainly want to know more about that. That sounds really, really interesting, and also an important point. But I just wanted to ask you. You just said that now we're possibly getting superhuman powers. But maybe we already had those. Maybe that's the natural state. And we've been dumbed down. our pineal gland has been calcified and has been separated from the heart chakra, which really can create. I mean, a lot of people talk about in the ancient civilizations that they could use their mind to actually move objects, large, huge objects, like maybe building the pyramids. And maybe they had alien help, but maybe they could also do that with the power of their minds. And we all know from law of attraction that through the heart chakra you can actually manifest things, and you even just thinking about somebody and then they call, which is in a primitive sense, but it can be used for everything. Everything is law of attraction,
It certainly is. But perhaps that base state that you're talking about that has been nullified from birth or kindergarten, get back in the box, paint inside. The crayon can't go outside the lines. It can only be dumbed down or nullified to a state, but when there's a natural extra force on top that's going to reopen that. Maybe that's where we're sitting now is, yeah, sure, the programming that's been given to us as the base construct of how you're supposed to operate. You go to school, you paint inside the lines, you repeat this kind of math. Don't think about using it in a different way. Electromagnetic hovering craft can't exist. You can never do something with magnets to make an electric motor. That doesn't work. Stay in the lines, go to school, go get a job, retire, put your money in there, and that's it. Those abilities that we've had have been really whipped out of us. But perhaps there is this cycle that kicks those back in regardless of how much deprogramming that has been done. And see, there's a lot of mystical and metaphysical thoughts about when the sun itself, I mean, every society in the past has worshipped the sun. So when we look at this and we say, all right, the sun's changing magnificently and in such a state that it's measurable on our planet now, would that not have huge reverence and a huge marker in time for previous civilizations? And not only that, but we just passed into the age of Aquarius, which is a faster frequency, and it's also 180 degrees around from the sign of Leo. So when you're looking at the galactic cross and different types of patterns and steps in time around the precession of the equinoxes, we sit right here at the beginning of what was on the opposite side, Leo, the Sphinx. Now that's a massive, massive change in time. And if we got the four corners of the galactic cross, we're coming through another cross point right now. So this could be a huge energetic awakening for all.
Exactly, and maybe that's also why Nikola Tesla was taken out of the textbooks and they wanted to erase him, basically, more or less at least, from history, the most important scientist of all time, you know, because he also talked about free energy and the ether, and that you could tap in to the ether, basically, and have free energy, and that would, of course, destroy the whole financial system as we know it. And also the abilities that we have as human beings, which is, of course, the main goal should right now be to really work on that sixth sense and the intuition and decalcify the pineal gland,
It is. I'm trying to share my screen with you right now because I pulled open a PDF of a presentation that I'd done before that I think you'd really like.
Yeah. Yeah, let's go to your slide.
Well, I want to make sure that I can... Are you seeing the writing? Oh, there we go. So as we look through these are the cycles that I'm talking about. When we look at smaller cycles overlapping with larger cycles, the Schwab cycle is what is inside the 11-year cycle. Then we have the Gleisberg cycle, which is a little bit longer on the 80-year cycle. And this is kind of alludes to this, economic reset, if you will, the fourth turning.
Can I just ask the Schwab cycle? I mean, is that in any way linked to Klaus Schwab?
It is not, but I thought it was very interesting also. No, it's linked to another scientist who was studying electricity and electromagnetism on a way to further extend radio frequency range across the curvature of the planet. Mm-hmm. So Gleisberg, and then we have these de Vries cycles. This is for a little bit further back in time, 200-year cycles. So as we start to look through these longer cycles here, grand solar minimum cycles are overlooping as combinations of these shorter cycles inside these longer cycles. And see, this is the thing that a lot of people talking about climate change, CO2 versus solar-driven climate change, never really take a look at these longer-term charts here going back some 12,000 years to see how the climate has risen and fallen naturally. I mean, what causes these massive changes here? And it's not really human influence if you go back more than 200 years. So what's causing the rise and fall? Now, during the Maunder Minimum, this temperature reconstruction map here is approximately 10,000 data points of peer-reviewed research of a researcher that went into an individual area on the planet and studied the climate in Mesa, Arizona. Came over and did something in Copenhagen, did something in Russia. Wherever they were, a very specific range of a lake core drilling sediment in the middle of Montana. Something like this. So they put all these data points together in terms of temperature, and this is what the temperatures had done during the Maunder Minimum, which is the 1600s, 1650 approximately. And where it's dark blue is where they lost the most crops. And you can go back through history and see history books laden with accounts of famines, government overthrows, etc. Points being, Alaska was warmer and Greenland was warmer. So if you're going to create a narrative when people start to see these changes in front of their faces, and you already know that Greenland would get warmer and Alaska would get warmer during these cycles, I mean, look where we sit now. Oh, melting Greenland ice. Oh, I'm sorry, the Greenland ice is increasing. So I don't know what you can say about that. But another thing that hits home is during these grand solar minimums, it's well-known science where the jet streams are going to move to and how it's going to pull the moisture north or south and how it's going to affect the rain and precipitation patterns across the planet. Again, we're talking thousands, tens of thousands of research documents on this, all peer-reviewed, by the way. So the monsoon is going to shift during a grand solar minimum or a little ice age. If it shifts, do you think somewhere would get warmer, wetter, drier? And then map it out. And then you can come down regionally and find some real detailed information on, I just chose this one because northern and central Australia right now are getting an enormous amount of rainfall, and you can see how the monsoon shifts back and it makes those areas really wet. Well, for me, studying Chinese and knowing China, why are so many Chinese firms buying all the cattle ranches in areas that were considered bone-dry desert in Australia 5 years ago, and now suddenly they're able to grow grass there without having to use irrigation? I mean, people know these cycles, and they're going to jump in on a business knowing these cycles as well, which I find a little bit strange. Now, these cloud cells are the things that are also going to start bunching up, and when they do, you're going to get these massive ring outs, just like happened in Germany. 2 cloud cells have collided over Europe and are ringing out as these are trying to find new areas to move to. It's almost like a traffic jam in the sky, because as our jet streams shift and move, the cloud cells are in conjunction with that, and they're going to find new flows, and they're going to go out of sync for a while. And this is exactly what happens. So when you're seeing a year worth of rain in a day, that's happening. 2 months worth of rain in an hour, that's a direct effect of that. Now here's something that just came out on July 15th, and this might, finally put the nail in the coffin for this one. The new anomalous jet stream pattern imperils global food supplies. Now this, I can't believe, is they're drip feeding you that food supply issues are coming due to jet stream movement. Now what we see at the top here is where the jet streams have sat for the last 120 or 150 years, where we have calculated when to plant and when to harvest most of the main grain crops. At the bottom, what we see is where they expect everything to move to right now because of changes, but they don't really tell you what the change is. I could probably say it's the sun changing the electromagnetic field on our planet, allowing these jet streams to move. But notice how they move, and you'll say, that's interesting. If we match them up here with the Grand Solar Minimum 1650 temperature reconstruction map, you start to see a lot of similarities of where the lost crops are going to be. Now, if you can forecast this out and you say, gee, I know a lot of crops are grown in Canada and a lot are grown in the United States in those same areas that are red above, and there's a lot of, Kazakhstan all the way over to the Ukraine, they're going to lose crops there too. And I look and I go, geez, all of northern China and parts of Russia, that's 100% match on at least 2 areas, possibly 3 if you want to consider Eastern Europe on these maps. So this research is done. Now it's just about the fallout happening. And since I did mention the planets and the planetary geometry, another thing fascinating is 79 AD is where we are going to sit in 2024 with the planets in the same exact location. 1 degree of arc difference, not exactly the same, but 1 degree out of the 360-degree arc is going to be different. So what happens at that point? Well, what you need to first understand is where the Earth's sitting between these magnetic fields. On the other side of the Earth, between 2 magnetic fields. Now, what happens when the when the Earth transits around the other side of the sun? It's going to get pulled a little bit closer. So the step down in the equilibrium of our Earth and the sun is happening at the moment. The charge needs to equalize. Hence, all this extra ground to sky lightning, the elves in the sky, the red sprites. You get an enormous amount of electrical activity because it's all connected through these magnetic field lines. Now, once this changes, or there's a change in the state of all of this, we start to see effects from the sun on the Earth. But then there's a second wild card happening, the second magnetic field in the outer solar system forming. So here's where we will sit on October of 2024. The Earth will be between a second magnetic field of the 4 gas giants, the sun, and us by ourselves. Massive effects are going to be foretold of this. Earth rips and crustal displacement in the top 2 miles of the crust is what's expected. So when you look at what the infrastructure holds on the top 2 miles of our crust, there's going to be some infrastructure breakdowns. But see, that excuse is already built in. COVID right now, there's supply chain disruptions. Well, how much of the disruption is from our infrastructure breaking at the moment? So the second magnetic field is going to be this, where the red square is. See, as the sun steps down, the same thing is happening to these planets as well. It's not just our Earth, it's a solar system-wide event. So if their electromagnetism is affected, ours is affected, all of these are going to start interlooping on each other because it's going to be the closest they'll ever be in 2,000 years in the solar system in that perfect square. Now these magnetic fields can start interlooping on each other in that square in the outer solar system, which means we're going to get 2 magnetic fields. So I'm going to do a couple simplistic graphs here so you can get the idea. Magnetism isn't like a record where it's just straight. It's a torus wave looping magnetic field. So from the sun, we're looping in this field connected to it generally by itself. Now, sometimes you get the planetary alignments where you have massive earthquakes. If Jupiter's lined up with something, Jupiter and Saturn, we always get 7.0 plus earthquakes. That's a direct effect as well. But what happens when you have a second magnetic field? I mean, it's one thing to show that previous diagram of a looping torus that's not moving. But when we look at these ferromagnets here, Earth is going to be right exactly where that dark spot is coming 2024. Now, the outer magnetic field is not going to be so intense, but it will be a second magnetic field that hasn't been seen in 2,000 years. Looping in on top of our Earth. Because think about how the Sumerians counted the planets. They counted outward into the Earth. So then if we go Saturn, Jupiter, Mars, Earth. So we'll be the second planet from that second magnetic field.
May I just jump in quickly? I just have a question for you about the previous slide, the one with the 2 torus fields. Yes. Well, the question is that we've just done our first show on flat Earth theory. And how it was explained was very much like a torus field. It looks like this, actually, that the middle section, which is a flat section, and then a dome on top of it, is how it is explained for people who are into flat Earth theory. And what are your thoughts on that? They say it's like a torus field, but we are in an enclosed dome. We're encapsulated, and that our solar system is inside of the dome and the planets as well. Could all of what you're saying, also with the grand solar minimum, also be something that you could apply to flat Earth theory?
As I look out and I've seen with my own eyes with a telescope, every other thing around us is a circle, is a ball. I don't see anything else out there that's flat. So if you look, how would our Earth be the only thing that's flat, but everything else you observe in the heavens is circular or round, an ellipsoid, whatever you like to call it, a shape that's not flat? Unless every planet you're looking at is completely facing you, that's flat. But then you can see the curvature of most everything around. So if I didn't have that observation, perhaps I could go with that. But everything else I've ever observed with my own eyes, or even looking through other telescopes, or you can get online, you can look at other telescopes that are much more powerful than anything you could ever handle. But being able to watch their online panning of the skies, etc. And I live in some really clear area out here.
But they have a very good and very thorough explanation for this, and I guess for...
I'd love to hear it.
Yes, and well, you can see the show that we've done on flat Earth theory, and we did an extensive program on it, and a lot of people go into that area as well. But we have, of course, interviewed a lot of people, researchers into all secret hidden truths, and they say that it's not so, that we are on a spinning globe, and it of course makes sense to most people, but we are discovering that everything we thought was true, it doesn't have to be, and everything is basically upside down. So it is an interesting thought, especially if it can be explained. But I just wanted your take on it, also in reference to what you are explaining right now and giving a lecture on, in terms of with the grand solar minimum.
I don't have the explanation or understanding of the flat Earth, and you're right, everything that we've ever known in history has pretty much been proven incorrect in science, has it not? Up to this point.
Yeah, and even pictures that NASA put out
NASA
of the Earth, that's also faked. I mean, that's at least what a lot of people say, that those are also not correct and truthful, and the moon landing and all of that. We've spoken a lot about that on the show as well.
I'm just still surprised that we're not allowed to transit across the North Pole, being the fastest way to move around this globe. It still shocks me that aviation is not able to just go over that little tiny piece, and we have to go all the way around the Earth, although they keep yipping and yapping about CO2. Why won't they let you fly from Japan over the North Pole right over to, say, EU, for example? Well, why don't I fly and come and see you, and I'll leave in Japan and we'll go right over the North Pole, and I'm going to come and see you? Oh, no, you can't do that. You need to fly all the way around. Why is that?
Yeah, it should be faster though, huh? If one was allowed to go that way.
Oh, we'll cut the travel in half, probably.
Surely.
But why is it that they never want you to see exactly what's on top of the pole?
Exactly.
Because you see that magnetic looping wave, it seems that there's a hole there. And see, this is where Hollow Earth might come into, Admiral Byrd's discussions of flying into that hole
in the ground, massive hole, yeah, that they talk about.
Oh, massive hole into the Earth, wide enough to fly an airplane into, kind of. But when you look at that, let me share the screen again here. I'll show you. I mean, when you look at that looping wave, when that torus magnetic loop coming down again, when you look at that, and if you were thinking it's on a planetary size, like how large would that opening be at the pole? That would be miles wide up there. Miles wide. And see, these are some things where blends of ideas come in together.
And we've also interviewed Max Egan, who's an old friend of the show, and
yeah, I know Max. I've spoken to him a few times.
Oh, you know him? Yeah, he's great. But he woke up. He was beamed by this frequency that he says was AI last year, and which revealed to him that the Earth was flat. And then the next day he had another beam vision, whatever it was, saying that the Earth is both flat and round depending on your perception, and that both things are true. That's what he explained once on our show. But it certainly is very mind-boggling and very interesting to entertain both thoughts, isn't it?
It is, because again, science has never settled, and I would never say never quit questioning. That's the thing about science. Never stop questioning, ever. You're always allowed to question. You should question. You should never stop questioning, ever. It is science. You never stop, ever. And to say the science is settled is insulting for scientists to say the science is settled. Because I'm looking here at massive gains of, that blue is ice gain on Greenland during the melt season this year. You're telling me that something's not like way out of the boundary over there, like, maybe we should ask a question or two about this. This is from a few days ago when I pulled this slide, as a matter of fact, 2 days ago. But the amount of gains is so far off the chart that one blue gain that they had at the end of May actually went up to 13.7 gigatons, which means they would have put 2 new bands on their chart here, although I thought ice was melting forever in Greenland. A lot of things just don't make sense any longer in the debate. When you're starting to look, and one thing that I think, and I'm going to maybe go off on a bit woo-woo for a second here, but the elite were waiting for signs to come to verify that this grand solar minimum was in play and that society would need to be more tightly controlled. And then suddenly at the middle and the end of 2019, we had all of these signs occur at the exact same time. If it wasn't with the no solar wind, like there was no solar wind for some time. And that was the most bizarre thing, where the magnetosphere of our planet, the shield, if you will, puffed out to like the size of a giant cotton candy thing that you would buy at a fair somewhere. And that was the first of the anomalies that started during 2019. And then the strongest summer jet streams ever recorded. So the wind speed started to pick up, as well as the atmosphere started to, well, behave strangely, compress a little bit, because the rarest and highest tornado ever formed occurred at that same time in December of 2019, and it was just sign after sign of the highest, the coldest cloud tops ever recorded on the Earth. All these things atmospherically started to happen at the end of the year, and then magically, what happened? 2020 and the whole COVID thing came into be. So I'm really, I'm kind of wondering, were the signs in the skies the things that triggered the control mechanism? Because still, I cannot believe that the bug just instantly appeared. All the control mechanisms put in place right now after debug. Only 99.9% of people survive it. And then all these things were put into place to try to curtail your movement, your spending patterns need to be tracked, everything else in place. And they also wanted to give you special medicine so you can't perceive reality as well any longer. It just kind of, it could have been 2018, could have been 2016, didn't matter, but all these anomalies occurred in the atmosphere, signaling the massive change has started. And I really believe they're interconnected somehow.
Well, maybe they orchestrated it a long time ago, knowing that there would be earth changes anyway. And also that there is this spiritual awakening, which could be very linked to the earth and the universal changes that we talk about here. I mean, that's also maybe why that's probably maybe why they really want to do this and try to get everybody back in place to control them further. And we also expect that this plan has been orchestrated, or planned for a very long time. It doesn't happen overnight what has happened here, huh?
Yeah, it sure doesn't. And the thing about another effect that's coming on to the planet here, when you look at we just crossed another magnetic field line, and this was another trigger for control. Because as I talk about the top 2 miles of the crust being greatly affected here, when I say greatly affected, I mean the railroads, the bridges, the pipelines, these are going to start shaking and cracking. Now, the magnetic field line, which I'm referring to, I put the yellow line right in front of us, is supposed to occur in August of this year, but it seems like there's already been an enormous amount of bridge splits, railroad fractures, weird landslides, the one underwater off West Africa that took out the cables there. And everywhere you look, there's these anomalies in terms of infrastructure and delivery systems that are having a difficult time staying intact.
Yeah, but could that be electromagnetic frequencies, phased arrays? I mean, we are now living in an electromagnetic soup, not only with the different Gs that they've turned on, but also with smart technology, Wi-Fi, all of the mobile technology, and now Internet of Things, and I mean everything. We are surrounded by these frequencies, and we are made of frequencies ourselves. So we're being bombarded from all sides all the time, and that could also affect the Earth.
It very well could, and I've had a fair few discussions with interesting minds that were talking about when is it that golden spike, this is an American euphemism, the golden spike where the railroads from the West Coast to the East Coast finally met and it connected the country. Well, when is that golden tower going to go in where the entire earth is then ensnared in a web of, there's nowhere that there's not this frequency that you're talking about coming out of a tower. Will it be the middle of an Amazon rainforest where that final golden tower goes in that covers the entire planet with a web of frequency? Where there'll be no 1 square meter, 1 square centimeter that will not be covered by frequency. And then that you're creating a false frequency around the entire planet. At that point, then you could talk about almost making the planet invisible or making it behave strangely as its own entity. Because that one single frequency going in there on that top, what, 300 feet? Or if you include the Starlink or these different satellite systems, the first, say, 50 miles of the entire atmosphere down to the crust. And then on the crust, you'd have another denser layer of frequency. So then imagine encapsulating an entire planet of frequency up to 50 miles, and everything beneath and below it was at the whim of you and your vibration frequency plugging in and making the planet shift on its own, behave differently, making the inhabitants, the animals, the plants themselves shift. Then we get into some bizarre talk then.
Certainly, absolutely. And this is also where we, the talk about being linked to AI. Some people say that there is a man-made AI system. And then some people say there is something beyond that, an alien type of AI, a super brain computer, way bigger and more, let's say, profound than the man-made one. What are your thoughts on that theory?
That comes in 100% right back into what you're talking about. The unified field that we're seeing here is nothing more than a computer-generated hologram. And is that back to the mainframe, and this is just a running program outside that, and what you're referring to is the actual hard drive or the actual node, or what different ways to describe what that mainframe would be? And we're just sitting out here somewhere as a looping program, and there's a glitch in it right now. Zzz, 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 archons can take over, and there's a glitch coming in it, and once that antivirus kicks that out of there, which could be a frequency wave from the rest of the known universe, and then it resets itself.
Mm-hmm. So while we are here and you talk about being prepared, and we all need to be prepared anyway for what's coming, no matter if it's a mini ice age or the Great Reset or whatever is going to happen in the next coming years, or a combination of it. Doesn't sound too amazing, does it? I mean, how can we grow our own food? And I know that if there will be shortages of food, what can people do? I know that you've also spoken about not eating. And there are these groups, these breatharians, I think they're called, right? And that can live and survive without food. So is our need to eat also programming?
And I think about that, just going back to the basic level of fasting for even 1 meal per day per week, or even 1 day or 2 meals per day once or twice a week, and varying it from breakfast to lunch, and then you eat the dinner. Or maybe one day you eat the breakfast and you skip the lunch and dinner. It's a healthy way to keep your body functioning correctly. As everything gets burned out of there, the acids in your stomach are able to dissolve everything more completely, resets everything. And if you drink a little bit of baking soda, and water to rebalance the alkalinity in there, and then you clean everything out, and then you put more food in the next day. Also, growing veggies is the easiest thing to do. Leafy greens are great, but you're going to need a community to do that. And going back to the community aspect, I mean, through history, yeah, you get communities that have survived on the most minimal amount of what we consider. You couldn't live like that. There's no way you could survive on just breath and air. But then there's so many recollections, and I'll use the Bible, of, you know, these miracles being performed, of creating food, existing without food, and these things that we consider absolutely impossible. But then when you go further back into Vedic texts and Indian literature and Bhagavad Gita and types, and you keep going as far back as you can in any written text of any culture that you can. Zoroastrists also talk about this. Now, what is it where you can exist on the vibration field of the universe itself? And so these are where areas of study that I delve into also to look, are these things possible? Because coming in knowing that food is going to be the thumb screws that the elite are going to use. Access to food, control of food, and the amount of food that you're going to get. Food is going to be the ultimate weapon for the elite moving forward. Mark my words, they're going to use food as the ultimate weapon. So you having access to food, being able to grow your food, knowing what seeds, and having a community that can grow bigger, larger amounts of food. But then think about the other ways to conserve foods, store foods, prepare foods, dry foods. But then at the other thing, like what you're putting into the body, can you minimize that and still have full brain function? And another thing that not a lot of people, they're just focused on food, as in like, here's a green vegetable, here's a can of something. You need to focus on the nutrients and the vitamins. So superfoods, Moringa oleifera, spirulina algae, these types of things that will be superfoods for your brain to continue its functionality at a high level. Because they always find that during these times of food insecurity or minimums of food, people don't function properly. They make a lot of mistakes. They have low energy. That's because the amount of food's not there, but then at the same time, it's the micronutrients, minerals, and vitamins that they don't have processing through the brain as well. And fats. Vegetable is one thing, but having fat so your body can have energy to burn is quite a different thing.
And people shouldn't start not eating, of course. I mean, being a breatharian is, of course, not something people should start experimenting with, right? Because we've been programmed and conditioned our bodies today. We're not used to that, so people would die eventually, wouldn't they?
Well, a lot of people aren't used to swimming either, but they take that first stroke and they realize that, hey, I'm not going to sink to the bottom of the ocean. So we should be exploring every single possibility. But I think going into that realm, suddenly you lose control because you can't make people pay taxes for food, stay reliant on the food system, control the diet, fill them full of junk, and then have them on the medical system on the way out the whole rest of their life. Like, you lose a lot of control by having people be autonomous, growing their own healthy foods. And heaven forbid they would learn another way to exist without a control grid that can put a meter on it. Oh, how dare you. That was a reference to Greta.
Yes, yes. Isn't she lovely?
Oh, she is lovely.
What about the farmers then? Do you know, I mean, are you aware of Sir Julian Rhodes? He talks about these farmers as well, the Polish farmers, I believe, huh?
Well, the only thing that I would know of somebody reference to that was back in the 1700s when supposedly this apprentice of the same Sir that you were talking about had created all of these massive greenhouses and irrigation systems and took aquaculture and regular greenhouse growing to the entire new level where it was so far advanced that you're like, we're talking about 20th century tech that you suddenly just came up with on a whim working with another guy in 5 years and build out this massive infrastructure and water irrigation and gravity pumps and all these things.
What is your most important message for people if they really try and make an effort to understand what is coming and what you are talking about? Because maybe not everybody can move into an Indian territory like you in the mountains of Tennessee and in other places. What should people generally do at the moment? Because then it looks a little bit like doomsday in a way, doesn't it?
or a little bit like freedom in a way, because you're looking at an entirely different way of life that gets you off of a lot of systems of dependency that we've been grown up to believe that's the only way to do it. Now, growing your own food with a community is one thing, and then being able to store that food is something different. The ability for you to understand, A, the changes that are coming and why they're happening on a natural fashion, but then how governments would respond to it. And then knowing that some of these supply chains might break down. So, A, more self-sufficient growing the food. Okay, that's low-hanging fruit. You're going to have to learn how to store the food and work with others and get communities up. But realize you're not going to be able to grow everything that you're going to need to eat. Like, I don't have a cow out here. It's hard enough to keep pheasants. So, okay, we have meat. We can get some meat. I can hunt. There's deer on our property. But in order to raise a cow, I'm just going to go down the street to a couple farmers I know and buy maybe a quarter of a carcass or a half carcass. Others out here, they raise goats, and you can go buy meat from a goat or from a goat farmer. But again, I already know them. I've been around. They know me through the community. Another thing is knowing where your food source is coming from outside the traditional supermarket supply chain. Go visit your local farmers. Go work in a community garden. Understand what seeds are, where you can buy them. Like for me, I go to the farmer's co-op because I have a registered farm. So I'm able to, and I didn't know this before. I thought you had to be a registered farm to go to the farmer's co-op. You don't. Anybody from the public can go in there. But the thing is, it's all bulk supplies for farmers. You're not going to go in and get, a 1 ounce pack of watermelon seeds. You're going to go in and buy like 1 pound of watermelon seeds. And this is the way that you can get bulk discounts as well and find things that you couldn't find in other places. So knowing where your backups to the backup would be as well. Start to know these people that are going to be the persons supplying you. So you don't walk, imagine if there's a big emergency and you walk in and go, I need eggs now. And there's a lot of signs. People have chickens around here. They sell eggs out of their house. So imagine if I walk up, knock on the door, like, hey, I need eggs. And they're like, I don't know who you are. Compared to me going, hey, Helen, I need some eggs. Can I get some eggs? And she's like, oh, yeah, sure. So think about the difference in that, of knowing the people you're going to buy the food from. So in an emergency or a pinch situation or a food limitation situation comes, that you already know the people providing. And, providing that and sharing that value. Like I raise bees. So some people want some wax. They make lip balms and different kind of salves and things for the skin. Great. I'll give you some wax. What could you give me? So there's all these ways to think about going outside the system where you don't really need to spend the money as you would. There's no tax when you go buy a dozen eggs from a farmer. I mean, they're supposed to, but in the real world, people don't. So think about your food and where it comes from. And if your supply, or if, let's say your supermarket stops, like South Africa is a perfect example. Now, all those people that are waiting in lines for 8 hours to get food in South Africa, how many of them went to the farmer that they knew? What's their secondary source of being able to get clean water and food? If you don't have a plan B and a plan C of knowing where your food's coming from, and I'll add one last thing, I keep pounds and pounds of microgreen seeds out in my garage, and I have some grow lights. So if something were to happen, I could put those seeds on a tray in day one, and within 4 to 5 days have full-on greens coming up. And then from that point, continuously fresh greens coming. Because again, it's about the micronutrients. You got to have some stored food. You got to have some money, paper money, because in the beginning of the collapse, the paper money is going to have value because people will still accept it. But bank machines won't be working. Cash registers might not be working. So bulk supermarkets won't sell to you. Even if you have money, this occurred during the COVID. I got an interesting story here. It's a place called Trader Joe's, which is a supermarket chain here. It's around the United States. Their computer system went down for some reason. They would not take paper money in there. So even the thing was like, let's say 80 cents or $1.80, and you're like, oh, here, I'll give you $2. They're like, no, that'll throw off our entire computer ordering system because they can't scan the QR barcode. So what if that happens? Then your money is worthless. Then what are you going to do? You're going to have to find somebody who will accept the money. Gold, silver, cryptocurrency, stored food. You know, these are things just like a short list. Do you have any water filters laying around that in case something were to happen, you could still get water? You might not know the source. I'm sure not going to drink the stuff coming out of a regular tap, but I'll filter it, then I'll drink it. So, I mean, how prepared really are you for these? And like, I got emergency lighting here. We got hurricane lamps and all kind of stuff. What if your electricity goes out? How prepared are you for medical? Because if you're able to get all these tasks in a row and tick off all those boxes, you start to realize that you have a lot of control over your life and how self-sufficient you can become. And when you start growing stuff and you can see that you can grow food, the light bulb goes off and says, wow, what if I do it for this plant and that plant? Oh, gee, I saved myself a couple $1,000s on food this year. Then you really start rolling going, hey, what if I build my own thing? And you have to incorporate it in the lifestyle. It's not something you're going to do 1 hour a week and be like, wait, I'm self-sufficient. I'm nowhere near self-sufficient. And we put hours and hours and hours every day into it. And it's building a skill set. I'm learning a lot. I'm getting way better than I used to be. But still, at the very basics, where is your backup food supply if the supermarkets stop? I mean, I would challenge everybody this weekend to go rolling out and finding a farm, even if it's one of those you pick at blueberry farms, because those are in the areas where everybody else has food too. Like, go find your local farmers who supply milk, eggs, fruit, meat, and talk to them and start becoming a regular customer. Go out of your way. Instead of driving to the supermarket, go buy a bulk piece of meat that you might need to cut yourself, so you learn where the cuts of meat are, how to follow the muscle line, where the bones are, all that stuff. Maybe I rambled there, but I mean, I could keep going for an hour on that.
No, this is really very, very important and very fascinating and a crucial topic to talk about. And when do you suspect that the so-called expected collapse crash will happen?
End of this year or Q1 2022.
So it's not that it's not in a too distant future, actually.
My personal opinion is no, because think about the elite. If they need to control everybody, they're going to have to get everything under control before the true crisis occurs, which would be the massive amount of disruption that'll be occurring in 2024 because of what I showed you there, those magnetic fields and what's going to happen with the Earth here. Once we cross over in August, we're in earnest going to be in that magnetic field for the next 3 years. And each successive year, it's going to get more and more intense. So, you know, you ask why the temperatures are getting kind of hot and whatnot. Let me throw you one last slide here and see if this will make sense to you as I pop this slide here. So this will take us through March of 2022. Now, where my cursor is, can you see my cursor right there where the Earth is?
Yes.
Okay, where's the Earth sitting on the magnetic field between those? It's far out. The second magnetic field and the sun are both pulling the Earth toward the sun. And all recollection, this is not my mathematics, it's mathematics from probably 30 others. Approximately 700,000 miles is the average on how much further closer we're going to be pulled during this time. Now the inverse will be true. So when we come around to the other side of the sun, when we're on this direction here, we're going to be getting tugged a little bit further out. Now, not nearly as much 700,000 miles, it's more like 300,000 because we don't have two full fields pulling us out. But, you know, going back here, and that Earth is going to get tugged closer to the sun, not by much, it's just about 1% maybe. And you might say, oh, 1%. Okay, well, it's a 1% closer pass or closer into the sun. And then we're further out.
And when we're further out, then that is when the cooling will start to occur. Is that what you mean? And that will happen in 2024. Is that what I mean, that's when it will begin, or what?
Well, it's already beginning. It's just each rotation as the Earth's going around now, it's just being more affected by the second magnetic field. We're getting tugged a little further out, a little further in. Our jet streams are moving. Temperatures aren't the way they used to be. And the Earth is definitely not as stable in its orbit as it usually is. And it's not a perfect circle. So by any means, it's not a perfect orbit. But the way it's moving, in this way, there's going to be some significant effects here in 2024. I mean, when we look at something like this, I'm like, oh my. We're in the center of that second magnetic field, almost in the center of it, with the sun. And for sure, we're going to be pulled much closer during this pass. In April, coming into May, June, that whole time frame, we're going to get much closer in. And then when we sit here in October of 2024.
In 2022, you mean?
Well, yeah, as we go through, each time the magnetic field is going to become a little more intense. As we get, see, the planets, those 4 planets aren't lined up into their perfect square as we're in 2021 yet. But each year, they're going to transit around. So Jupiter, now notice where Jupiter is in this. And then as we go to 2022, you can see how Jupiter moved more to the west, if you will, on this quadrant map. And it's starting to become more of a square, more of a square. So Jupiter is going to be the thing that finalizes the square. So as you see the date on the bottom there, March of 2022, as we come in of March 2023, you see how much more Jupiter had moved, and it's really finalizing the square to create that second magnetic field. So as Jupiter's moving, we're still going around faster than Jupiter, so we're getting caught in that magnetic field more and more and having more of an effect as it intensifies. So 2021, it's really starting to kick on. 2022, we're in it. 23 is when it's going to be significant. But 2024, when we start to see this, I mean, we are absolutely in the middle of that second magnetic field tug, and the Earth, the Sun in April, but then this is the final period here. Now, once this culminates, it's really unknown what's about to happen, but a lot of mystic traditions talk about an instant awakening of all humanity at this point. Is it the second electromagnetic field looping with this torus wave that there's 2 magnetic fields and something happens in our brains resonance-wise? Whatever it is such a significant date that the elite have to have everything in play before this date occurs. Everything needs to be solidified.
But do you also think, David, that we will see people losing their lives? That, you know, that a lot of people have talked about now with what has happened now with the medicine and all of that. Do you think that will happen? Is that a theory, or will we see that happen?
From all the research that I've seen, it will happen. And that's unfortunate that people have been lied to in such a fashion and fear to the nth degree to get them to make those choices. Now, I understand some people in some professions did it because they were afraid of losing their job. But for me, I'm more afraid of losing my life than my job. And to put something, you know, special medicine in a body to maybe take away those people, or maybe the upgrade won't affect them, or the magnetics will be different in that field. Something significant about whatever the metal is in the body and the magnetic field. You know, you've already seen those videos that things are magnetized. And I'm talking about magnetic fields. And there's magnetization in people after they get medicine. It's got to be related somehow. It's got to be. I don't have enough info to come up with a wise explanation as to how these magnetic fields overlooping and seeing people sticking stuff to their bodies with magnetism, and how magnets work and snap together north and south, how all this, you know, makes a logical explanation or a logical story to move forward with.
Absolutely. Much more research is needed on this, and we already know a lot. Please talk about something you've created called Adapt 2030. That is your website or your platform, huh?
That is the platform for as long as it stays online, because now that I've been targeted from Vice News and Advanced Democracy, a George Soros arm, that means that all of these grand solar minimum channels are now being pointed at, maybe not for removal at this second, because they're more worried about medicine, messages, and a few other things. But as we move through 2021 into 2022, when some significant earth changes begin, I think at that point. So I'm over on BitChute, Adapt 2030, Rumble, Brighteon, which is Mike Adams' site, who runs Natural News, the Health Ranger. I do have the website. It's called oilseedcrops.org. And I'm getting back to work on that to do more postings. And I also have the podcast, Mini Ice Age Conversations, which is hosted across the net. Now, I've kind of let that drop off for the last month or two as I'm getting more. It's planting season out here. So for me, it's all about getting the gardens together, getting a lot more things ready and solidified, and just organized. And it's these 2 months were spent for me to get ready to grow my own food in a better fashion, and getting ready to buy things when they're cheaper to be able to store them through the winter.
So if people want to contact you for an interview or something, what would be the easiest way?
You could reach out to me at media@oilseedcrops.org, or go through the website, which is oilseedcrops.org. Now, the Adapt 2030 channel is all about what we talked about. We have to adapt our food growing strategies before 2030.
And people can learn much more about your work and your information if they go to your website. And, it's been absolutely wonderful, really fascinating, and very, very great to have you on. You're a great man, and I want to thank you very much, David Dubine, for being on Age of Truth TV. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thanks for letting me on. I'm really excited to see how the people resonate that are on your audience with the information here. So, yeah, if you're out to Tennessee, you got a place to stay. We've got extra rooms here, so come on out.
Oh, amazing. I'd love that.
Yeah, Luke, thank you.
Thank you so much, David.
Took a few turns there that I hadn't expected, but I'm always willing to throw what I know out.
Thank you very much to David Dubine, and thanks to all of you for watching Age of Truth TV. You can support us by clicking onto our website, ageoftruth.tv. And please like our videos, subscribe to our channel, and hit the bell for notifications. You can also sign up for our newsletter on our website, ageoftruth.tv as well. Please subscribe to our alternative channels on BitChute and Brighteon, and follow us on Instagram and on Facebook for updates. On behalf of the Age of Truth TV team, we thank you so much for watching, and we'll see you again soon.